Hello, it's the Celldex here, and today we're going to be doing another tier list video. Mostly because I did a bunch of research on that last video, and I just needed a break, so we're doing something lighthearted and something that doesn't take a lot of research. Today, we're talking about the Scions and how well they can cook. I don't really think I need to say this, but none of the information I'm about to say is based on anything in the games. This isn't based on the lore or anything. Barely any of these characters actually cook in the game, and the ones that do, we get very limited information about their particular skill. So instead of doing that, this is mostly just going to be based on their personalities and how well I'd think they do trying to learn how to cook and following recipes and stuff. So without further ado, let's hop in. The first character here is Alize, and I definitely feel like she's at the bottom of the list. Maybe not all the way down in Burns Pop-Tarts, but I don't really think her personality is that conducive to cooking. She's not a very patient person, and I feel like she'd get frustrated really easily at a complicated recipe and want it to turn out perfect the first time and then get really frustrated when it doesn't and maybe blow something up. So she's definitely at the bottom of this list, if not at the very bottom slot. Next up is Alphino, and I feel like Alphino is a little better at cooking. I feel like he's got more of the temperament and personality needed to, at the very least, follow a recipe, so I feel like he's in home cook territory. I don't really think he'd be any higher. He doesn't really talk about cooking much, and I can't really see him cooking on a regular basis. I think his interests lie elsewhere, but I do see him being competent enough to produce like something pretty tasty. Next up is Ehrenwald, and this one's hard because we get, like, very little information about him. I feel like by default I have to put him in this tier. Food is probably edible, because we just don't know enough about his skills, and I really don't know enough about his personality to be able to gauge where he would be at cooking. He definitely seems like he'd be a more patient person, so maybe I should put him above Alize, but I can't really justify putting him up in home cook, because we just really don't know how well he can cook. Kryle's also going to be hard because she seems like the kind of person who would be competent enough to cook, but she's also from Scion, and in 5.3 we find out some really interesting things about Scions and their value on cooking and foods. At the very least, I am going to put her in home cook. I don't think she'd be bad enough to be down in food is probably edible, but I don't see her putting too much value in learning how to cook more than, you know, producing something that's reasonable to eat. Next up is Falamen, and Falamen's going to go in Could Open a Restaurant. There isn't really anything in the game that says she definitely knows how to cook or is good at it, but that's just the kind of vibe she gives off. She's kind of like a motherly figure to everyone in the Scions, so I feel like she'd be pretty good at cooking, and I feel like she could probably open a restaurant if she wanted to. Louie Swan is also a hard one because we have no information on his cooking skills, and he's also a Sharlayan, so in fact, he's also a Sharlayan scholar, which means that he has the same value, he holds the same value as cooking as most Sharlayan scholars, which is not very much. They really just see cooking as a way to get sustenance into their bodies, so I don't really think he'd be any higher than food is probably edible, although, like I said, we don't really know, so I could be wrong. Next up is Lise, and Lise is going to get the honor of being the first one and probably burns her Pop-Tarts, because I really don't see her being very good at cooking at all. Kind of like Alize, she doesn't seem to have the temperament for it, and unlike Alize, she's not even a scholar, so I couldn't even say if she'd be good at following recipes or not. Maybe she's better at cooking than I'm giving her credit for, but this is just based off of the personality from her that we see in the game. I don't really see her having the patience or wherewithal to produce something very good, and she seems like the kind of ditzy person who would totally burn Pop-Tarts. Next up is Philia, and I feel like Philia is definitely going at the top of home cook, simply because she's Falamen's adoptive daughter, and I feel like Falamen would be the kind of mother who would teach Philia how to cook, so I feel like she'd have at least 80% of Falamen's skill in cooking, if not 100%, but I don't know that, so I'm not going to put her all the way up at Could Open a Restaurant, but I feel like she's definitely at the top tier of home cook. Next up is Breeda, and this one is also really difficult. I would put her with home cooks, but I actually kind of want to put her a little higher, if only because she's Urian's childhood friend, and I feel like the joke there is that they're like complete opposite characters. Urian is really stoic and serious, and he'd he plays his cards really close to his chest, and Breeda wears her heart on her sleeve and basically just is the most energetic and fun-loving of the Scions. So I feel like Urian definitely doesn't know how to cook, so I feel like Breeda probably is a really good cook, and just we never get to see it. Next up is my character Mutsuki, and Mutsuki's going right behind Philia in Home Cook. Much like Philia, or at least the reasoning I have for putting Philia at the top of Home Cook, I learned a lot of how to cook from my mother, who I think is an excellent chef and could probably open a restaurant, so I hope that I at least have like 80 to maybe 75% of that in me, and could probably produce something pretty decent most of the time. Next up we have Grahatia, and Grahatia is definitely going and could open a restaurant. I definitely feel like he could open a restaurant if he wanted to. He does bring us the sandwiches, and I know sandwiches are kind of like on the low end of, oh hey, this is really difficult to make, but they did look like really good sandwiches, so he could probably open a restaurant if he wanted, but I can't really justify putting him above anyone else. I guess I could put him above Breeda, because we don't know if Breeda knew how to cook, and we definitely know that Graha knows how to make sandwiches, so I feel like he's going above Breeda, but not above Falamen. Next up is Papa Limo, and this one's kind of difficult because I really can't get a gauge on how well he could cook. I feel like he'd be better than Lise, but I don't know if he'd be better than any of these other characters, so I'm just going to put him at the bottom of Food is Probably Edible. I might bump him up a little bit later, but I'm probably going to stick him there for now. Next up is Rambros, and Rambros is also hard because we also don't get a lot of information about him. I'm going to put him at the bottom of Home Cook because at the very least he has some standards. He doesn't really like Archon Loaf. He knows what it's supposed to taste like, he just doesn't really like the taste of it because Archon Loaf is actually pretty disgusting. So I feel like at the very least that means he has standards on how things should taste and probably could produce a halfway decent meal. Next up we have Tataru, and I'm putting Tataru at the bottom of Could Open a Restaurant. She is known for making really good tea, and she also did a really good job of recreating Archon Loaf just from a recipe, given that she's never tasted it before. Now, the loaf itself is not very good, but I think that's more down to the recipe she used and not the fact that she's a bad cook. I think she is pretty reasonable at cooking, and the fact that she was able to recreate it so accurately probably means that she could do that with a bunch of recipes, which in my mind means she could probably open a restaurant. Although I'm not going to put her above anyone else on this list, because the only example we have of her cooking is Archon Loaf, and it was disgusting on purpose, but still disgusting. Next up we have Thancred, and there's no doubt in my mind that Thancred is all the way down here at Burns Pop-Tarts. I can't see him making anything edible at all. I feel like he's the kind of dad who would be like, hey, I made breakfast, and Reen would be like, you ordered this, didn't you? And he'd be like, yeah, I ordered this. So I definitely don't think he's a very good cook. I also don't think Kalhai is a very good cook, because he was raised by Elidibus, and do not tell me that Elidibus is good at cooking. He's good at cooking up plans, maybe, but he's definitely not good at actual cooking. I don't know if Elidibus needs to eat. I don't even know if Kalhai needs to eat. I mean, he probably needs to eat because he's a person and not an Ascian, but I don't know. Next up is Urian, and Urian is definitely at the bottom of Burns Pop-Tarts. Urian likes Archon bread, which I feel like is in and of itself evidence that nothing he produces is going to be remotely edible. I feel like he'd just throw anything together in a pot and call it a day. I can see him being able to follow a recipe, but I just can't see him having like the taste buds or the intuition or the sense or even the desire to learn how to cook beyond just letting other people do it for him or just eating like a bunch of Archon Loaf every day. That's the only thing Urian eats. This is now headcanon. Next up we have Ida, and I'm putting Ida at the bottom of Food is Probably Edible because there's no indication at all that she's good at cooking, but I feel like she'd be better than Lise, especially since she took care of Lise when they were younger. So I definitely feel like she'd be somewhat good at cooking, at least for Lisa's sake. Like, if that was the only reason she learned, I feel like she would learn. But since we don't really get any indication of her personality beyond that, I can't really say whether she'd be kind of good at cooking or good enough in cooking to be considered a home cook. Next up we have Yustolo, and Yustolo is hard because I feel like she'd definitely be able to learn how to cook if she wanted to. I just don't know if she'd want to, but I feel like she would want to, mostly because she was raised by Matoya, and I can't see Matoya being a good cook. I think Matoya would be down here next to Urian, where like the only thing she eats is Archon Loaf because she can't be bothered to do anything else but learn magic and study magic. So I feel like by virtue of just wanting to have edible things in the house, Yustolo would learn how to cook just because Matoya wouldn't. But I don't know. Maybe she doesn't. But I'm going to put her there for now. But she's definitely not going above any of these other characters. Next up, as you might have noticed, we have one tier left and one character left. And that's right. This is my friend's character, Crystal. And she's going up here in Iron Chef Eorzea. She cooks a lot of great stuff. She has culinarian to 80. She was actually known as the FC Mom for the longest time because she'd go around making everybody stuff. So she definitely deserves it. And I wanted to give her a shout out, especially since she got really close to reaching Saint of the Firmament, but was just barely kicked out by people who were probably botting. But that's a discussion for another day. And that's the end of the tier list. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, none of what I just said is based at all in the lore. This was all just a silly video idea that I had, and I wanted to get it out there. So I hope you guys did enjoy watching. If you did, be sure to leave this video a like, leave any suggestions or comments or disagreements with my list in the comments below. That's going to be fun to read. And be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this, and also more serious Final Fantasy XIV lore content that isn't just me ranking a bunch of characters based on something I have no idea about. So once again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.